How is everybody? Same to you. Same to you. Thank you. Hey, Shadrach. You're welcome. Yes, yes, yes. Holiday bonuses went out at midnight, as is the tradition. Mm-hmm. Good to see everybody. Yeah. Again, happy holidays to everyone. I think what I might do, I might give away a family constitution workshop today. Maybe that'll be my gift. We didn't do a Q&A on Sunday. Instead, we were talking about bond laddering. Um, and so I figured I'd just kick it with you guys a little bit. Do a little bit of a Q&A before I start running around. So today is a work day for me. Got to run around. I have different teams in different cities. So we do a holiday lunch for some and dinner for others today. So I'm running around taking care of the team. So that'll be what I'm doing most of today. You just sent me a message. All right. Well, it probably went to the answering service, but I'm here now, so you can ask me. A few hours ago. Okay. All right. Well, what was the message? I'm looking to retire in about 7 years. Do I have to relocate with your special, or can I just? Oh, can you just have an Airbnb? Is that what you're saying? As an investor? Yes. Yeah. You absolutely can do that. Um, it's just a matter of the permit. So then, instead of processing a Class K permit, which is an ordinary residency permit, which is what most of the folks who have onboarded are getting because they're focused on dual citizenship, you would just process, what is it, a Class G, right? So a investor permit, right? And so once you process that investor permit, we would do the same thing. We build a house for you. It'd be right here by the beach, so it's very Airbnbable. Actually, the land where the houses are being built. Some of them are already Airbnbs, so that's actually a half decent idea. And then you just be able to Airbnb because you have an investor's permit, so you'd be able to legally do business here. Once you do that, if you do it that way, we'll sit down. Like, if go ahead and set up a consultation, we'll sit down and get into it. But once you do it that way, it's just a matter of making sure that we set up the right companies for you and that you have the right companies in the US, because there are ways for you to take the dividends from your international Airbnbs to your US company, tax exempt. So you just got to set it up the right way in order to do that. So we'll have our enrolled agent, who's an IRS certified enrolled agent, sit down with your CPA or whoever and explain how that works. Okay. But yes, you can do that. You can run the special as a pure investor and not worry about immigrating here. And I'll look for your message, and I'll make sure I send you out a link so that you can do a consultation with me and we can get that all squared away. But yeah, that's super easy to do. Yes, you would still get the bonds, but you need to decide like what you want to do with the bonds, right? Because if you're doing the investor thing, you can still get the bonds, and the bonds can go to you, right? Or you can still get the bonds, and the bonds can go here into your trust since you are planning on immigrating, just not for 7 years. I assume you're retiring in 7 years, maybe, but whatever the reason for the 7 years, if you wanted to go into the trust, support you once you retire, that's always a great idea. And then if you wanted to actually support the business, we have two or three people who are doing that right now, where they're just not paying anything into the Airbnb again ever. So the bonds actually cover like payroll and toilet paper and laundry and like the stuff that goes into the business, right? So you just have to decide what you want to do with it. But yeah, it would still be part of the special. Hi, Fox fan. Hi, what is that? Rams fan? Rams fan? Yes. Hey, C, how are you? How's it going, Jacob? Yeah, it's open Q&A. Got a good investor queue right off the bat. How about that? Family Constitution. Family, yes. Yeah, I think I will give away a family Constitution seat. I'm in a festive mood. What's a family constitution? See, every now and then, typically 3 times a year. Last year, though, we only did it twice. We'll do a family constitution workshop. And so what that is for folks who are just getting started on building out their family and starting like their generational wealth and getting their dynasty going. They typically need some kind of guidance for the future generations and the extended members of the family. And that's where the family constitution comes in. Most important part of the family constitution, bar none, over the nearly 2 decades that we've been doing this, the most important part of the family constitution is the conflict resolution article of the family constitution. It has saved so many of our generational wealth clients and kept their families together in situations that would otherwise tear them apart. And so that part of the family constitution makes it possible to handle conflict instead of half the family just doesn't talk to the other half of the family, which is typically what happens when something, horrendous takes place. You're in that situation now. Yeah, most people are. Most people are. Most people are in a situation where there's someone in the family that no one else in the family deals with. And they don't necessarily know why, right? Or someone said, that person's like a rat or something, and only that person knows if it's true, but for whatever reason, half of the family is aligned with one side and the other half is aligned with the other side. Sometimes it's something super personal but super foul at the same time, right? So we've seen, a lot of like sisters who slept with the other sister's husband. That's a huge thing. I didn't realize how common that was, but there's a lot of that. And so that pulls families apart. If you don't have a method by which we're going to sit down, figure this thing out, and deal out punishment. Like it's not a kumbaya session, families deal out punishment, right? Look at the Windsor family. No one knows. There's all the tabloids can say whatever they want. No one knows why Meghan and Harry were punished within that family, right? But there's a family constitution. Something went wrong, and the family constitution was convened, and punishment was dealt out, right? And so punishment is part of it, but understanding that when something goes wrong in the family, it's going to be handled in a non-biased way, and that everybody in the family can kind of predict the outcome is easily by far the most important part of the family constitution. So we've seen all kinds of stuff happen via our trustee company and annual reports and stuff. But we've seen all kinds of crazy stuff happen in families, and the family constitution rectified it. And we've had those families come back and say, if it wasn't for the family constitution, our family would be torn apart right now. That's not the primary purpose of a family constitution, mind you, but it's definitely the most important part of it. One of the most important articles. There are other important articles as well. The accounting article, as boring as that may sound, is actually incredibly important. Uh, so conflict resolution article, an accounting article, how the family deals with money. Um, there may be specific things in the family constitution that focus on whatever your family is known for or wants to be known for, right? So that becomes important because it's identity, right? The more identity the family has, the less questions the newest members of the family have about who they are, why they exist, why they're here, blah 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 blah, and the more productive they can be within the family. Families are crazy powerful. Like, the weakest family would trash the strongest individual. Families are crazy powerful. I feel like that's why in certain like Western societies they press individualism just so that the ruling families never have to give up power because you'll never be able to beat them as an individual. So, you know, compete with the family if you want to. That's a good point. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. When Sam Walton was an individual, he basically had a mom and pop shop. He had a very small outfit, but he built a dynastic family. Now, the Walton family have created an international giant, right? Last time I checked, this might not still be true, but last time I checked, Walmart as a company had something like 70% of the world retail buying power. One company can control the prices, can control 70% of the prices in the world because they can order their vendors to change the price or else we're not doing business with you, right? Which really matters when the business that you do with someone is 80, 90% of their business and it's $800 million dollars a year. So when you say, hey, listen, we pay you $800 million dollars a year, we'll keep paying you $800 million dollars a year, but we need 10% more product. You've just decreased the price by 10%, right? You've controlled the market price of that thing as a retailer, which is crazy. That's the unprecedented power of Walmart. And so that happened when they became a family. You cannot beat a family. Families are incredibly powerful. No matter how far back you look in history, individuals could not beat families, right? You need a conglomerate to even approach a family. Nah, you're reading the cliff notes of history. You think revolutions beat families. Why are there still families? You're reading the cliff notes. Go back and read it again. Mm-hmm. Hmm. That's an interesting question. I guess it depends on how you measure power. There are definitely multiple very powerful families out there. Um, but I guess it depends on what kind of power you're talking about. Like there are politically powerful families. There are families that are really powerful in specific industries. There are families that have extraordinary social currency. So it really just kind of depends on, the money is the easy part, right? So if you tune in on generational wealth talks and all of that, you know that the money is ridiculously easy to do. That's not the hard part. The hard part is being steward over the money in such a way that the money isn't blown by one or two generations, right? That the money actually lasts. So if you're asking who's the richest family, that would not equate to who's the most powerful family. And then, if that's not what you're asking, if you are asking who's the most powerful family, it depends on what kind of power you're talking about. Well, that's why there's more than one. I mean, like a family that's at the apex of its game, if it wanted to wipe out another family, it's possible, right? And there's thousands, if not tens of thousands, of apex families, right? So the reason why there are so many is because there are so many types of power and so many domains to be occupied, right? So you can be the king of your domain and it not affect someone else's domain. And that's not like a zero sum game type of situation. So when it comes to power, it really depends on what arena you're playing in. You've never heard of social currency before? So there are certain things. There are certain things that, by not knowing what they are, essentially, how does that work? I'm trying to think of how to say it in like a way that doesn't seem mean, right? If you don't know what they are, then you don't belong in that like class, right? So it's one of those things that people almost use in general to see if someone belongs. And it's not like people say class and then they always think of like a rich class, upper class, whatever class. No, it's a social class, right? So it's one of those things where trying to think of a kind of pop culture example. Oh, so there was the Netflix show Stranger Things. It was a big hit. Everybody loved it for a while there, right? And so there were these Dungeons and Dragons game references in the show, right? And so I think the big villain of the show was like a Demigorgon, which is like a monster from the game, right? So if you were like a nerd, a gaming nerd, and you played Dungeons and Dragons, and all that stuff, you knew what a Demigorgon was, right? So if you talked about a Demigorgon and somebody else turned around and said, "What's a Demigorgon?" That's an automatic tell that person is not part of your, you know, gaming nerds Dungeons and Dragons social class, right? So it's not all about like money stuff, right? And so those things kind of happen all the time in all different types of social circles. And so if you don't know what like social currency is, it's typically that you don't trade in it. You're affected by it, but you just don't trade in it, right? It's kind of like the folks who have been working, at a grocery store for 20 years. They have a 401k, but they have no idea what a stock is. They don't care about stocks. They don't trade in it, but they're affected by it because their 401k is on the stock market, right? But they don't trade in it themselves, so they don't know what a put is and a call is and a derivative is, and they don't know. All right. So it's one of those things where if you don't know, it's because you're not trading in it. And so that kind of goes back to your question. The family that has the most of it wouldn't matter to you. You wouldn't see them as the most powerful because you don't trade in that domain. Does that make sense? So that's why the whole power thing is like weird. You know. Finding Nemo. It is morning where I am. Yes, it is. It is 6:40 in the morning here. Which family? The Japanese royal family. Yep, the Japanese royal family. In my opinion, right? Japanese royal family would have the most social power. Why? Because they have the longest unbroken lineage. By far, dwarfs the House of Windsor. The House of Windsor. The House of Windsor actually have some issues historically. some some ancient kings have been dug up, and it turns out they're the milkman's son. Now we have DNA. So House of Windsor, they have some legacy issues, but yeah, the Japanese royal family does not have any legacy issues, and they are definitely the oldest unbroken dynasty on the planet. Well, yeah, those are like offices. A lot of people kind of don't think about them the right way. For example, the Emperor of China is like a restaurant owner in Thailand, right? Because the emperor is like an office, right? But that doesn't change the lineage of the family, and it may or may not change the ability of the family to function as a powerhouse, right? As long as the family is united, whether they have an office that they sit in or not, doesn't really matter, right? Mitsubishi is a similar situation, right? If you look at like Mitsubishi and Hyundai and those, you know, those companies, you'll notice if you're into like Japanese feudal history that their logos, right, are very similar, if not identical, to feudal samurai banners, and it's because they're the descendants of those samurais, right? They're the descendants of those daimyo, not just samurai, but they're the descendants of like the kings of those tribes of samurai, right? So those families are still united, whether they sit in that office of daimyo or not. They're still united, and so they're able to, you know, they're able to still take over industry. They're able to still dominate in certain sectors of business, so on and so forth. The Mitsubishis were the best. Yeah, they were pretty good. They were pretty good. They're, if I'm not related, they're part of the House of Tekeda. So they're related to Tekeda Daimyo. So a lot of the houses are relieved when they're no longer in the office, right? So a lot of the houses are relieved when they don't have to be shogun or daimyo anymore, or emperor or king, because then they can kind of slide into the cut and just make money. Well, because all of it starts with the family constitution. Same as like a country, right? Like a country can be an amazing powerhouse, right? It can, govern the world. You know what I mean? You can have an America type country where it's an amazing powerhouse militarily. It sets policy, globally and all of that stuff. It all started with the Constitution. It all started with, a couple guys sitting around a table writing out a constitution and then sticking to that constitution, right? So same thing with families. It all starts with the constitution. Write out that constitution, then you stick to that constitution and build out the family, and that's that. It's super simple. It's just not easy. Simple is not synonymous for easy. Hmm. Happy holidays to you too. Whichever holidays you're part of. The flies are going crazy. I guess it's fly mating season. Like the flies are going crazy with each other. They just happen to be flying around me while they're doing it. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, is that's like the big question today? You're the second person to ask. Yeah, you can do the end of year special as an investor. You don't have to move here. Yeah, we just change your permit. Like the people who are moving here are typically getting Class K permits. We just change you to a investor permit, and you never have to enter the country at all. You can Airbnb the house that we build you. Yes, you have to get an investor permit, or else you'd be operating illegally. You wouldn't even be able to operate. Yeah, you have to get an investor permit. You can't just open a business in someone else's country. You have to get a permit to do that. But yes, you can do it. And I guess let me just answer all the questions the last person asked before you ask them. Yes, you still get the bonds, and you choose what you want to do with the bonds. So you can either have the bonds come to you. You can have the bonds stay here if you plan on immigrating later. Last person who asked said they were immigrating in 7 years. Or you can actually have the bonds paid into the company as like a runway, as like owner's capital. And you can set up documentation with the company that the company owes you that as a loan, right? So you can do it that way as well. I didn't say that to the last person because I didn't think of it in the moment, but you can do it that way where the owner's capital is coming in and it's a loan and it has an interest rate, and so you just cash that out later. So you could do that if you wanted to. What time is it here? It is 6:48 a.m. here. I answered everything before you asked it. That's great. No, somebody else actually asked that. That's interesting. What did I say? Were you like looking at a recording of my live? What did I say in the last live that has everybody thinking about that? That's pretty odd. Within the last 30 minutes, two or three of you guys have asked the exact same question, which also lets me know that that's something I don't cover often. So I should cover that better. But yes, you don't have. I tell you what. No, not most. 40% of our clients don't ever come here. 40% of our clients own Airbnbs here or farms. One owns a school, stuff like that, and never come here. It's just an investment. Like they just invest here, hire a local team, and let the local team run it. They pay everybody, of course, and that's it. But they don't actually move here at all. That makes it even easier for a lot of people because a lot of people then they do all their financing from their home country, which if their home country has like bankruptcy laws like the United States, that it makes it safe for them to try, because they can try to do something. If it fails, they can file bankruptcy, which is exactly what bankruptcy is for, by the way. Right? So they can, engage in that venture, roll the dice, legitimately try to do something, and if that something doesn't work out, they can file a bankruptcy. And then if the credit implications of filing that bankruptcy are leaning on them a little too heavily, Some of those folks then just come here because, you still have your permit, whatever permit you had, no matter what permit it is, it allows you to live here. So you still have your permit, you're still able to live here, you still have your property here, you still have the business here. If you work through us and you work with bond laddering, you have monthly income that's happening here, right? So a lot of folks are just like, I'm going to give it a shot. Oh, it didn't work. Bankruptcy. I don't like how this bankruptcy is affecting, my ability to move through U.S. society. I'm just going to go to Kenya for 7 years, and then the bankruptcy is off my credit report. I can go back if I want, stay in Kenya if I want, whatever, because you have the right to be in both places because you're a permit holder. So, especially the folks that the trust is taking the bond funds, by the time the company fails, the trust typically has millions in it. So, and those millions are owned by the trust. So, you file your bankruptcy, what's in the trust doesn't go anywhere. The trust is actually untouchable, period, within the bankruptcy. So as long as it's set up correctly. What kind of what kind of trust was the right one again? So you're talking about something you heard me say. If you say again, I'm not. So at trust, the name of the trust is typically a marketing thing, including the names of our trusts. Right? It's a way to let people understand what we're trying to accomplish with the trust. So the exact name of the trust is typically marketing. Like there isn't actually a dynasty trust, right? Or a spendthrift trust. Like that's just what you're doing with the trust. Typically, you have a revocable trust, an irrevocable trust, or a testamentary trust. Wait, you said in the live something about not having to report to the IRS. So a non-grantor trust. That's a status that comes from the IRS, right? So when the IRS looks at a trust, it decides, based on its criteria, what kind of trust it is. If it's a grantor trust, you immediately, what is it? IRS form 3520 and 3528. Don't hold me to that. But those are two of the things that you got to do. You got to do a FinCEN form 114. You got to do an FBAR. There's a bunch of documentation, right? Where you have to tell the federal government where all your bank accounts are, the trust, all the stuff, right? And then possibly even pay taxes on it, right? Okay. And the whole point of that is if it's a grantor trust, you have your fingers in the trust and you're benefiting from it directly. All right, that's essentially, what that means. So there's like a control test, right? And if you have too much control over that trust, it's grantor. And all of that stuff applies. All of the filings, all of the things you have to do with the IRS and all that all applies if you're an American. If it's a non-grantor trust, which means that it passes that control test. Well, I guess there's no pass or fail, but the control test shows that you do not have control over it, right? If that's what happens, now all of a sudden you don't have to make any filings because the control test, which is a test from the IRS, right? They breaks down how they work. You can look that up on their website. The control test will say you're not in control. And if you're not in control, you have no responsibility. And if you have no responsibility, you can't file for it, right? So that's what the control test is essentially trying to figure out. And so if it's non-grantor, then the trust has all the responsibility. And if the trust is not dealing with Americans or American assets, then it doesn't have to make an American tax return, right? And so what ends up happening is in those situations, the only time any kind of tax return happens on the IRS side or any kind of filing or whatever happens on the IRS side ends up being when a distribution is made from the trust to a U.S. citizen, right? Which with these generational wealth trusts, that can be 30, 40 years from now, even 60 years from now. We have folks that do grandchildren, right? and they go from there. A lot of religious folks. There's what is the there's a passage in the Bible that says something to the effect of a wise man leaveth an inheritance for his children's children or something like that. So there's a lot of like religious folks that are like, oh, the Bible says, and so they leave, the trust to their grandchildren. They leave it to their children's children, right? And so in those situations, number one, those trusts are very rich by the time the grandchildren get to it because compounding has happened for now, like 60 years at that point. And number two, they're rock solid because you didn't create the trust. Your parents didn't even create the trust. Your grandparents created the trust, right? So everything that those trusts are so protective, it's nuts. Because there's no chance of making the argument that they're a sham trust. Number one, there's no chance of making the argument that they're an unseasoned trust. An unseasoned trust means that the trust has not existed long enough to protect you, right? So in different jurisdictions, there can be rules where it's like, oh, the trust is younger than 2 years old. We're going to pretend the trust doesn't exist, and the judge is going to order that you go in that trust and rip out everything that's in it, right? That's why you always create a trust when there's no problems. Create that trust immediately and let that trust season. You let that trust age, for a couple of years, and then you get the full protection, right? So if your grandparents created the trust, no one can make those arguments. Now you're rock solid. I'm so, which that wasn't a funny question, but I read it and in my mind I heard it in my little nephew's voice. Sound like a little kid. Tell us the story about the guy. All right. So, tell us the story. Tell us a story about the guy with the $50 a month child support. Sure, I'll tell the story again because it feeds right into this narrative. But his parents had created the trust, and his trust owned a company. They actually owned many companies, but they owned one company that was already relatively successful. And so the kids were all able to intern at that company because the hard thing, remember, the easy thing is the money in generational wealth. The easy thing is always the money. The hard thing is the financial literacy, the stewardship, and the education to keep the money going. That's the hard part, right? And so part of the education for them was the son, they had a son, but all of their descendants being able to intern at the company at the youngest working age allowed, right? So I believe it was starting at 16 for him. I believe it might have been 14, but I believe starting at 16 he interned with the company that was owned by the trust, and the company had perks, and these perks were universal, right? All C-suite members of the company and senior management could also utilize these perks. And so part of the perks was you had company housing, and another part of the perks was there were company cars, and there were leases, and so the cars changed every 2 years when the lease was up, and high-level members of the company could have a car, essentially take a car home with them, right? And so by the time he was 18, he had already worked 2 or 3 years minimum wage as an intern. He continued working, but he never adjusted his wage. They could have done that. This was actually a mistake. Now it's not. Now it's the way they do it. But that was an oversight, right? Because he just didn't need more money and he didn't really care what was in his bank account. And so he kept getting paid minimum wage. And somebody noticed, like, this kid's only 16. He had a new car when he was 16. All of a sudden, he has another new car. He's 18. Where does he live? Oh, wow, look at that house. He has a really nice house, right? So somebody started dating him, right? I believe by 19, they were married. By 20, there was a kid. Still working for minimum wage, though. So, working for the company that was owned by the trust. By 21, she's filing for divorce. She wants the house. She wants the car. She wants the child support, the whole nine. And because they had forgot to adjust his wages, this wasn't a strategy. It was just something that nobody did. When they got into that divorce court, it ended up being that the trust had been around way longer than was necessary for seasoning because the parents set that trust up, probably probably about a good 5 years before he would even qualify to do the internship. So the trust had been in existence. It was offshore, so it really didn't matter what the judge said. He had no jurisdiction over it anyway. The car didn't belong to him. The car was a lease that belonged to the company, and it wasn't even the same car, since every 2 years the lease changes, right? It wasn't even the same car that he was driving when they got married. He had been making minimum wage from the time he was 16 to the time that divorce was happening. He had never, made a different wage because he didn't need one. The house was corporate housing and did not belong to him. So in the end, the judge was like, "Cool, you can't have half of the house because it doesn't belong to you. You can't have half of the car because it doesn't belong to you. He makes minimum wage, so you can have $50 a month in child support." And that's the ruling of the court. So according to the client, she literally like gave him the kid, signed off on the rights to the kid, went found another man, pretended she had never had a kid, married him, and did the same thing in 2 years to him, and it worked that time because he didn't have a trust. But then that became standing operating procedure for their trust. They could have upped his salary, which would have been disastrous in that situation for him, but they ended up seeing what it would mean for them if they kept everybody at minimum wage and just gave them corporate, perks instead. And it was good that those corporate perks also weren't, just for the kids, because that would have created a complication as well. So since the other managers for the company, they all got free cars and they all got free housing, and it wasn't like, a sham. It wasn't like we're pretending it's a corporate perk, but really it's his personal house, and we're pretending it's a corporate car, but really it's his. No, everything has to be legit, right? But that's where the protection is that everything is legit and you're moving forward in that way. So yeah, now that's just standing operating procedure for them. Now everybody makes minimum wage. So if you sue them, if you win a judgment against them, and that judgment is based off of the money that they make. The money that they make is virtually nothing. So it just depends. It just depends on what you're looking to do. But those generational trusts, they get stronger and stronger and stronger every generation. That's why families like the Kennedys are not concerned about like gold diggers, because their trust is so old and so powerful, it wouldn't matter. That it would be the same thing that happened, with this family, right? That they just wouldn't get anything. Yeah, man. Planning wins. Planning always wins. If you plan well enough, you can make sure that your family are immune to certain laws and certain rules, especially civil laws and civil rules, because civil laws and civil rules are essentially just codes of conduct between people. So the penalties for them are typically financial, right? You typically don't go to civil court and then go to jail, right? So if that's the case, then not having finances essentially becomes the cheat code to civil rules. Same thing with Medicaid look back trust. That's a big thing that people use in the United States a lot, right? They can use a trust. Now there's a Medicaid look back period of 5 years. So again, planning wins. You have to create that trust more than 5 years in advance of your elderly parents needing Medicaid, for assisted living, or these super expensive things in the United States, where they come like, if you get Medicaid and you need assisted living, they actually come take your house and take your the inheritance that your kids were supposed to receive to pay for those things. So a lot of folks will create a Medicaid trust, and put the house and all the things in the trust, but it has to be 5 years before they need Medicaid. Because if it's less than 5 years, then the law says that they can go back and break that trust open and take everything out of it, and still just take it. If it's been more than the 5 years, then they can't touch it, right? As long as it's been designed properly, right? And so it's planning. Planning wins. Planning always wins. Hey, Mwangi. Mwangi, that sounds like a Kenyan name. You are Kenyan, living in Seattle. Okay. Can you take advantage of the end of your special as yes, yes. And there are some pro ratings that would happen, right? There are some pro ratings that would happen for you because you don't need immigrant. Now, are you ethnically Kenyan or are you a Kenyan national? Is your nationality Kenyan, right? Because if you're like ethnically Kenyan but you don't have a Kenyan passport, then it's great that you're ethnically Kenyan, but that doesn't matter to the government, right? So if you're ethnically Kenyan, then there might not be a prorated price because we might still need to do your immigration work. Um, you're a Kenyan national. You have dual citizenship. Excellent. So then we don't need to do immigration paperwork for you. So right away that changes, the price. So we'll credit the immigration part off. And then for you, one of the big things that you might want to do if you're Kenyan, especially if you're a Kenyan national, not just ethnically Kenyan, then you probably have some kind of family land here, right? And there's probably a concern as to if something happens to you, will your children be able to inherit the land? Because family members will try to intimidate them or try to steal the land out from under them, blah, 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 right? It's like I'm reading your mind. I've been doing this for a while. So what we do if you're a Kenyan national, typically what we do is all of your lands out here get put in the trust, and then the kids are either co-beneficiaries or they're the beneficiaries of the trust. So you never have to worry about inheritance issues and the Kenyan nonsense that goes on between families when it's inheritance time, because the trust will own all of your lands, and your kids will be beneficiaries of the trust, and there's nothing that anybody can do about it. Right? So there's more meat in the trusts of Kenyans in the diaspora like you who do business with us because you typically have lands over here. A lot of you also have shops that you've never seen, right? Like your sister or your cousin was like, "Oh, I'll run the shop for you, but it's your shop. Can you invest?" Right? So you own a shop somewhere that you've never seen before. Stuff like that. Obviously our law firm will investigate it and see if it's real or if you're just throwing money away to your sister or your brother or your cousin, and then we'll put you know those companies in your under your trust as well. So your trust will actually take physical ownership of that business now, and there'll be more accountability there. But yeah, if you're a Kenyan in the diaspora, there's a lot of kind of more meat in the trust creation than like just a standard investor or an immigrant. Can we do that? Well, eventually, like you don't, if you're an immigrant client, you don't have lands and shops and all of that in Kenya, right? So that's what the difference is. It's not like a preference difference. It's you don't actually have those things here. But if you're ancestrally Kenyan, then you probably have like ancestral land and stuff like that. So, but eventually, like at this point, you know, well, I'll be Kenyan in a couple months. By nationality, I'll have dual citizenship in a couple months. But at this point, I also have like lands and like shops and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So eventually, you'll get to the point where you can do the same thing, but it won't be at the start of your trust. Whereas for someone like him, it is at the start of his trust. He gets right into that because he has ancestral land back in the village. Maybe he's invested in some plots. Some cousin or sister asked him to invest in a business that they say is his that he's never seen. Like these things happen. Within the special, no. No, sometimes it does. Like if you're outside of the special, yes. If you deal with the end of year special, there would be no difference in price for the trust. but typically trusts are priced based on complexity. So if you're a Kenyan in the diaspora, your trust is more complex than an immigrant, and that would normally increase the price. But if it's part of the package, then the price wouldn't change. I thought you said that if you add assets to the trust, you'll lose the non-grantor status. I may have said that, but what I meant was if you add U.S. based assets to the trust. The non-grantor grantor status typically only applies to U.S. citizens, so that's one distinction. And then it's a U.S. asset, right? So that's why the bond laddering is so great, because the bond laddering actually pumps money in to the trust every single month, but the source of funds is the Kenyan government, right? It's a Kenyan asset. It's not a U.S. asset. So that does not change the non-grantor status with the IRS. But yeah, if you reach into a U.S. bank account and you don't structure that money properly, which you need to speak to a tax professional in the U.S. about, then yeah, now you're pumping U.S. assets into an offshore trust, which is going to have a problem with that control test that we were just talking about. Now, when they run that control test, how much control over this trust do you have? And you're funding it, you're pumping money directly from the United States into the trust, then you're going to have a problem. Yeah, it's a different answer for different people. Absolutely. That's why the freaking social media gurus are normally all full of shit, because they'll tell you this is the answer and they know nothing about you, right? So even a top level professional can't do that. They have to know what your situation is in order to give you the actual answer. So it just depends on who you are. We wouldn't recommend Americans putting land directly into the trust because it's probably American land, right? Versus this guy, he's an American by nationality, which is the nationality of U.S. citizens, right? Is American, but he has Kenyan assets, right? So him putting a Kenyan asset into the trust is not putting a U.S. asset into the trust. So even though we wouldn't recommend the same thing for an American, it's completely different for him because his situation is different. So you can't just be like, oh, this is the answer for everybody. As soon as you hear that, the person's full of shit. Almost no matter what industry they're in, if they're saying this is the answer for everyone, they're typically full of shit. Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of basic logic, right? If something worked for everyone, then at the very least, the elite people would be doing it, right? Like at the very least, your Musks and your Bezoses and and all of those guys would be doing it, right? But they don't. They all do very different things, with the exception of buying real estate, right? So anything that was universal like that, we would know. There would be there would be proof, right? There would be like social proof, like you'd be able to see, like, oh yeah, that's the thing right there that everybody does. So with the exception of purchasing real estate, that really doesn't exist. And even within purchasing real estate, they all do it differently, right? Because there's different ways to get different tax breaks or get different concessions. By purchasing different asset classes of real estate, purchasing them in different ways, um, you know, purchasing them on their business versus on their residential. There's all these different ways to do it. So all of those things, all of those specifics depend on you, and that's what your specialist is for. Your specialist It's supposed to take a look at what you got going on and then figure out what's the best path for you. And that's an interesting question. No one's ever asked me that. Do you have to use a specialist? Can't you use a generalist? I mean, you can. Here's the thing. If you go into the doctor's office and the doctor says, I think you have brain cancer. Based on your blood work, these elevated, results, it seems like you might have cancer. And then we did a full body MRI and we see like a shadow in the brain. Are you cool with the doctor then saying, so I'm going to cut your head open and like see if I can find it, pull it out, I'll do it. I'm not going to refer you to a brain surgeon and and a cancer specialist. Does that make sense to you? Right? So if you wouldn't allow that, then you probably don't want a generalist doing things for you. You probably want a specialist doing things for you, right? So once the testing is done and it's, oh, well, I think we got a problem over here. Okay, great. Now refer me to the brain surgeon and refer me to the oncologist, right? Like I don't expect the general family doctor to now go cutting open my skull or trying to give me chemotherapy, right? So that's the difference. So yeah, I mean, I guess you could try to deal with the generalist. Quite frankly, the generalist should refuse. Right? Like even if you did want your family doctor to do that, they should refuse. Right? They should say, no, 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 no. I have to refer you to a specialist. I can't do this. So you can attempt to do such a thing, but the generalist shouldn't even allow it. Unfortunately, there are people who will just take your money. So I'm sure you can find one who will set you up for failure. Hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I won't be here too long just because there's so much shit I have to do today uh, for employee holiday festivities. So I won't be here too long. Normally I'm with you guys for about 2 hours. Probably take off after an hour today. Then go start getting things done. Oh, yeah, maybe I'll go live from like the employee dinner stuff. I think they're setting up a bouncy castle now for the kids of the. There's some of the construction workers didn't leave because we have a bunch of houses going up. All right, end of year special. So some of them were like, "Oh no, we'll stay, keep building the houses like during the holidays." So those folks are here. So it's a small kind of skeleton crew, but because they're here, we're gonna go ahead and do like a dinner for them. Yeah, from time to time. I think we're doing a fireworks show for New Year's, so that should be fun as well. Typically at the beach. We typically do fireworks shows at the beach. Sometimes we actually do them on boats. So we'll like take a boat out, or like not us, but the people we hire to do the fireworks. They'll take like a boat out and they'll actually like do it over the water. Interesting. Guess there's no chance of burning anything down that way. Charity, yeah, but that's a personal thing. So I tend not to talk about it on the business page. Yeah, but there's a school in name only that is like ridiculous. Like it doesn't really have any walls. Um, there's dirt floors, and so when there's dirt floors, you can have like mango flies and like chiggers that go like into like the skin of the kids, and then like they gotta be taken to the hospital and like cut out. There are these little bugs that'll like burrow inside of you and live inside of you essentially, and stuff like that. So there's no toilets, you know what I mean? Like it's a mess. So that'll probably be our charity project for this year. But that's like a person, like it's not the company doing a charity project. Because remember, the company is American, and we hire vendors in Kenya, right? So we don't do direct like charity work in Kenya per se, but my family foundation in Kenya does that stuff. So that's why I don't talk about it on the business page, because the business isn't has nothing to do with it. So if you go follow my personal page, then you'll probably see more talk about the charity work in the next coming days. You'll see a video of the school. So yeah, we'd like to build them out something and get them some solid. Like they don't even have like desks, right? Like the desks that they use are a ridiculous facsimile of a almost like a lunchroom table, but it's like falling apart and it's made of like old bad wood. So they don't even have like a place to like write. You know what I mean? Like the basic stuff of school. So yeah, we'll be working on that as far as our kind of end of year charity type of stuff. But you're not going to see a lot of information about that on here because again, it's not part of the company. So follow my personal page if you want to see that stuff. A lot of the well, I guess if you're following on YouTube, it might be hard to find my personal page. If you're following on Facebook, you can look for the House of Dibole. But if you're on TikTok, typically every post that the social media manager makes on the TikTok, they tag my personal just so I can see it. And so if you go to the end of almost any post, here we go with the puzzle. Yesterday it didn't ask me for a puzzle. So if you go to the bottom of any of those posts on TikTok, you should be able to find a tag to my personal. If you're on YouTube, I really don't have a personal YouTube. So you either want to go to the House of Dibole Facebook or go over to TikTok and find me on TikTok. Yep. But all right, guys. So it was fun. I do have a bunch of holiday work to do. So if you guys have no questions at this point, I will take my leave. It's been about an hour. I know I typically do about 2 hours, but there's a whole bunch of holiday stuff that has to get done. So if you guys have no questions for me, I will go. I may be on later during you know, company festivities. So I may go live from the construction site where we're doing the company. That might be like 8 in the morning for you guys. I don't even know what time that'll be. You guys on the east coast of the U.S. All right. I think we're good. Thanks for hanging out with me on your holiday. And we'll talk to you guys later.